Good morning. Welcome to Tall Oak Homestead. My name is Carrie. Initially today I was going to be baking, doing some fudge and some lemon tart bars. But then I went to look in my freezer for something and I have bags and bags of bones from chicken and turkey, vegetable bags. And I thought, well, why don't I take the time today, make some broth, and then maybe a little later this afternoon, once the broth is sat for quite a while, I can make some turkey soup. So making broth actually is very easy. There's really not much to it. I would say the only hard part to making broth, and it's not even hard, it's just getting comfortable with it, is the processing. So when you make broth, to make it able to stay on the shelf so it's stable, you have to pressure can it. And I know pressure canning for some it can be very stressful. I had never pressure canned until last year, and now I pressure can a lot. I do potatoes, which is great when they're on sale. I buy a bunch of bags and I pressure can them. It's just getting comfortable with using the canner itself. And it does sound daunting, but if you read the instructions and you're very careful, it's really very safe process. And it's a great way to make a lot of items to keep on your shelf. So as you can see, I have bags of bones. We had a turkey a few weeks ago. And so I saved all the bones. And it was a large turkey. And I will pick the meat off of these bones once they've sat. I had to use my biggest pot because I didn't realize I had so many bags of things in the freezer. One more bag of bones. We'll buy Costco chickens a lot, and when I'm finished with that chicken, I will throw all of that in the freezer to use for a broth. Here's a bag of, looks like onion skin, tops of celery when I cut my celery to put in the fridge, a little bit more bones. I save all of that. It's going to be one big pot of broth. These are the stalks from a cilantro. Some asparagus. An old carrot that I was going to throw out from the fridge. Some onion. And these are all, these last items I'm putting in are items from the fridge that have been in there for over a week. So I thought rather than compost them, I'll throw them in here. There's nothing wrong with them, but they're going to be great for adding some extra flavor. Some celery. And I do add a few aromatics. I'm going to add a little bit of salt, not a lot. I know that looks like a lot, but there's going to be an awful lot of water in this. A little bit of pepper. A few bay leaves. Oh, one more. Oh, getting low on bay leaves. And I'm going to add a garlic clove. Let me just get out a cutting board. I'm just going to add it in whole like this. Because at the end, once this is sat on the stove and boiled for quite a few hours, I will strain this. So that's all you have to do. You put all your bones, your vegetables, your seasonings, put it in a pot. You're going to fill this with water. We're going to put it on to boil on the stove, and we're going to let it simmer. Once it comes to a boil, we'll turn it down and we'll let it simmer. I usually let it simmer for 2 to 3 hours. Once that's finished simmering, I'll fish out all of the bones, and what I'll do is I'll put them in a bowl in the sink, let it cool down, and then I'll pick off any meat that's on there. So what I'll probably do at that point is I will take some of it aside, and I'm going to make some turkey soup from that, and then the rest of it I'm going to can it. I'm going to fill the pot with water so that everything's covered, and then we'll put it on the stove to boil. That's heavy. I'm gonna put that on high and cover it. When it comes to a boil, we'll turn it down to simmer. Okay, so I mentioned that I was going to be making some turkey soup, so I figured while I had my cutting board and knife out, I might as well prepare the vegetables for that. I can just get them all chopped up, put into a bowl, and then ready for later when we are going to be making our soup. So when I do make a soup, I like all of my ingredients to be fairly around the same consistency in terms of the size of them. So I like to use my little chopper. Probably, I would say that's probably a good size. I don't know if you can see that. You want it to be big enough that your vegetables aren't going to disintegrate into the broth. So I'll start with some onion. Okay, there's our onion. Looks to be enough. I could always add some later, but once I get all the vegetables chopped, it will be a good idea. I tend to forget too that when I'm making things like this, it's really only Andrew and I. So I'm used to cooking for a lot of people. Sometimes I get a little ahead of myself and I end up with a lot more of I was actually intending. Oh, those onions are strong. You'll see in the soup that I'm making today, the vegetables that I'm using are just what I had available to me in my fridge. I didn't bother going out and buying anything additional. I'm going to use some carrots, some potatoes, some onion, some green beans, and some mushrooms. And I will, just before we have the soup this evening, I will add some corn to it. Just don't want the corn to turn to mush. I do find when I'm making soup, I really enjoy cutting up all the vegetables. It's actually really therapeutic. More too. Okay, and there you have it. We have our vegetables all ready for our soup. I'll just put those in the fridge and we'll have those ready for use later. Another little trick I use when I make gravy, if I have any left over, I will freeze it flat, just to have extra room in the freezer. But I will use that gravy when I'm making soups. It's just, we already know it tastes good, and it's going to give us all the added flavor of seasoning. I made this gravy from the chicken or turkey that we ate. I don't keep gravy any longer than that in my freezer. So I'm going to let that thaw out. By the time the broth has finished stewing on the stove, we can put that in. We'll add the vegetables and we'll let that simmer and we'll have a delicious dinner. I took out a loaf of sourdough bread that I made a few days ago, so I think we're going to have a great dinner today. See, the stock is starting to boil quite nicely here. Just going to give it a bit of a stir. Make sure nothing's stuck on the bottom. Perfect. Okay, I'm going to turn this down. And then we'll cover it. And let it simmer away for a few hours. Okay, the stock has simmered for well over 3 hours. I've placed the pot in the sink because it's much easier for me to scoop out all of the bones and the vegetables into this bowl beside it. You can tell it's been in there for quite a while because any meat that was left on the bones is just falling off, which is going to be perfect for our soup. It's not very appetizing looking right now with all of this floating things in here, but I can guarantee you that once we've got all of this out of there and I've strained it to get off if there's any smaller pieces that I missed with the scoop, it's delicious. It's going to make delicious stock and delicious soup. I'm going to have to let the bones cool down a little bit. They're going to be very hot to the touch, and it'll be really hard to try and get the meat off of the bones when it's that hot. Oop. Looks like a massive chicken wing in there, a turkey wing. I might have to get another bowl out. Sometimes what I've done too is I will scrub my sink really well, give it a very good rinse, and then I will just put all of the bones and the vegetables directly into the sink, and then that way if there's any extra liquid that I missed, it will drain. That's the skin. That's not very appetizing, but it does add some extra flavor. I'm surprised I don't have any of my little dog friends underneath my feet here looking for a treat. Okay, I think I might need to get another bowl out. This one out. I decided to make the turkey soup in a smaller pot, as I find the larger the pot, the more I keep adding into it, and then by the time I'm finished, I have enough turkey soup for 30 people. Andrew and I don't eat that much soup. I think I've got, for the most part, the big pieces. I think what I'll do now is I'll get my pot back out here and a strainer, and I pour it in, and that will get all of the little bits here that I'm missing. The stock smells really good. I haven't tried it yet. All right, I'm going to go and get my large strainer so that we can drain this. And then I'm going to carefully try and pour this in without making a huge mess. Ooh, that's hot. Okay. Pretty big pot of stock. Okay, I transferred the gravy into a smaller pot so that I wasn't making a massive amount of soup. I'm going to transfer all of the vegetables in now to the pot that we chopped up earlier. All right, who are you trying to kid, Carrie? You're going to have one massive pot of soup here. I tried. I'll scoop some of the stock. Well, the good thing about this is the soup does freeze quite nicely. So we can have a nice meal tonight, and then we can freeze some to use at another time. Get this stirred up. I'll put some corn in there as well, but also when I've pulled the meat from the bones, I will add some of the meat in here. And there we have it, the start of our turkey soup. Okay, while we wait for the bones and the meat to cool off, I am going to get started on processing the broth. So first things first is we have to put in about 3 quarts of water into the pressure canner. So it's got to be hot water. There is a mark on the bottom of the pot that shows you where that is. Always make sure you have your rack in the bottom. You can't put your pots directly on the bottom of the pot. I believe that's at the level there. You also want to add in a couple of tablespoons of vinegar. That helps with any discoloration of the bottles. Okay. So we're going to get these filled up. And with pressure canning stock, you pressure can at 15. Your pressure point is 15. Because we are at a very low altitude, we don't have to worry about increasing that at all. And we leave about a ½ inch headspace in the jars. Oops. Can be a little messy. I'm not going to turn on the pot, my pressure canner, until I've got all of the jars ready. And that's okay because the stock itself is hot, and the water I just put into the canner is also hot. So we're not going to be worried about any breakage of glass, which can happen. So you've always got to be very careful when you're putting in any liquid into your canners, whether it's a water bath canner or a pressure canner. You always want to put like with like. Okay. Looks like we're going to get 8 500 milliliter jars. There is still a little bit of stock left in here, but I think what I might do is just freeze that. Okay, perfect. I'll just move this aside here. All right, let me see if I can just wipe this up a little bit. It's a little bit messy. There's a little bit of fat in the stock, and that's to be expected because we did have the skin in the pot, as well as the meat and the bones, so it is going to produce a little bit of fat. There wasn't enough on there that I felt that I had to strain it. There have been times when I have made some broth and there is quite a bit of fat on the top. So what I've actually done, especially if I do it in cold weather, I'll just put the lid on, put it outside on the back patio here, let the cold weather take over, congeal up the fat, and then I can just scrape it off the top. So we're going to wipe these down, and then I'm also going to get a cloth with some vinegar, and I'm going to wipe the tops of the jars to make sure that they'll seal properly, because if there is any fat or anything along the top edge of your rim here, when you are sealing, it will interrupt the seal. So you get a good bit of vinegar on the top and you go around. So as you're going around to get rid of the fat or any debris, also feel for any nicks in your jars. If there are any nicks, then replace the jar, because it might seal, but then it also might break in the canner. I've never had a jar break in my canner. I have had a bit of siphoning go on, and what that means is if it doesn't seal properly, as the pressure builds up in the pot, it forces the contents of the jar out of the jar before it seals. Okay, I feel good that all of these are nice and clean. So I'm going to get my seals. Soup is bubbling away there. Seals on. And then before you actually use your canner, every time you use it, you should always check your seal to make sure that your seal is still intact. I did that. There's also a little vent at the top. You need to make sure that that is not plugged up. If that's plugged up, then you could have an issue. Okay. Get some lids on. And you just tighten it till it's snug. You don't want it too tight. Okay. It's going to be nice to have some stock back on the shelf. I've never made is beef stock, and I think I might try that this winter. Probably would have to go to a butcher and get some bones, because I don't typically buy beef that has a lot of bones. But we do have quite a few good butcher shops in our location. I can go and check some out. Okay, so I'm going to place these in the steam canner. Before I do, this was the vent I was telling you about right here. Look in through your pot, make sure that you can see directly out. You don't want that to be plugged. And then make sure this is your pressure gauge. Make sure that that's on. I believe this is a 23-quart canner that I have. It's a good size one. And actually, if I was to do double this amount, I have a ring that I can put between layers, and I can double stack these. But I don't have that much stock. Okay, place all the jars together. I don't have them touching. We're going to put the top on. Okay, there we go. Tighten it together, and then I turn it. I lift it and turn it. Because I have a glass top stove, I don't just turn it manually, because I'll scratch my stove, or I could break it. turn it so I can see my pressure gauge. And I'm going to turn this burner on high. And what we have to wait for it to do, it's going to now, the water's going to heat up inside and it's going to come to a boil. And when it comes to a boil, the water starts steaming out through this little gadget right here. You have to let that steam for 10 minutes. Once it's finished the 10 minutes, you put this little cap on right here, and that's pressure in the pot. And this is when you have to start watching your temperature on your stove. I've got it written down based on my stove and how hot it is. I know that once it gets to a certain pressure point, I need to lower my stove because it needs to maintain that temperature for a good 15 to 20 minutes. And I believe for this size of a jar, I have to pressure can for 20 minutes. So we have to wait for this to come out 10 minutes. Once that's done, I put this on, and then you wait for it to come up to temperature. I pressure can between 12 and 15. I'm going to do these at 12. And then once it reaches 12, that's when you start the time for your pressure. So then you set your timer. You have to keep your eye on the stove to make sure that it doesn't go past your pressure point. If it does, you need to lower the temperature. Once you've reached your time limit, you turn the oven off, you leave the pot on the stove, and then you have to wait for the pressure to come all the way down to 0. That's where people I think are worried about the problems with pressure canners. Once it's come all the way down to 0, you just leave it. Then you can safely take this off. If you were to take this off during this being pressurized, it's going to shoot through the roof. So you don't want that to happen. So you're just going to leave that on until you come down to 0, wait 5 minutes, take this off, then you can open up your pot and take out your jars. So we're going to wait for this to come up for 10 minutes. Okay, while we wait for the canner to come up to temperature, I'm going to start going through these bowls here, pick some of the meat off. You just got to really be careful when you're picking the meat off that you make sure that you get all the bones. Some of them are tiny. Just don't want a surprise. I put a lot of stuff in this pot today, so there's a lot to go through. As I get further down in the bowl, the hotter it gets. It looks like the backbone. Some dark meat in there. Yeah, see what you need about the bones. You gotta be careful. There's a whole chicken wing. Turkey wing in this case. Ooh. And see how hot that is. I'm looking forward to tonight's dinner. It's going to be delicious. Once the weather starts to turn cold and the snow hits the ground, for me, it's soup time. I love soup. I could eat it pretty much for any meal. I could hear the water starting to come to boil in the pot. Get used to recognizing the signs of your canners. And I don't know if I mentioned, but I don't, when I place my jars in there, I don't have them touching each other. Oh, there's a lot of meat to come off here. A lot of liquid on the bottom that's very hot. Gonna turn it a little bit so that, whew. So as I mentioned, I can potatoes when they come on sale. And it's such an easy item to have on your pantry shelf. They're great for when you're having bacon and eggs in the morning. You just empty them out and you pan fry them. You can just warm them up and eat them just as a side. I do them both plain, so just in a, you can them in water, or I've also canned them with fresh rosemary, fresh thyme. So we have seasoned potatoes. And it's basically, it's like, I don't know if you as a kid would have, when we would have potatoes in a can, we always thought that was kind of a cool thing. That's exactly what it is. They're potatoes that have been processed so that they're shelf stable. Ooh, that is hot. I can hear the jar starting to dance around inside there. So I would imagine we're going to start to get that little boil shortly. Okay, let's add the turkey meat that we've picked into our soup. Give it a little stir first. You notice that there's a bit of a red tinge to my soup, and that's because when I make my gravies, I start in the bottom of my pan with whatever I'm cooking. I have tomatoes, mushrooms, onions, and garlic, sometimes celery. That's why my gravies tend to have a bit of a red tinge to them. Put this turkey meat in. There we go. Oh, it's going to be perfect. The potatoes still have a while to cook in the carrots. It's going to let that simmer on low. Can't wait to try it out later. See, the canner is getting pretty close to being ready. You'll see this gauge right here starting to spit and bubble. When the canner comes up to pressure, that actually raises. That's the way you know that your can, one of the ways you know that your can is pressurized. And I can start to see a little bit of steam escaping from here. Gotta wait for that to come out in a steady stream, and then we'll let that go for 10 minutes. Okay, you can see the steam starting to come out of the little valve there. So I'm going to set the timer for 10 minutes. Boiling rapidly for 10 minutes. I'm going to put the pressure regulator on. Did you hear how much pressure was coming out of that? You can see this is now up. I did double check my recipe that I follow in my Ball book of canning. I'll put a link below if you'd like. Find this very useful. But it did say that I need to be canning this at 10 psi for 20 minutes. You can see we're now at 10 pounds of pressure, so what I'm going to do is set a timer for 20 minutes. I've put the heat down to low just to maintain that 10 pounds of pressure so that it's not going to increase. And we'll give it 20 minutes. Okay, the 20-minute timer's gone off, so I've turned off the stove. I've very gently moved the pot over to the burner beside it that wasn't on, and we'll wait for the pressure to go down to 0. It should take between 5 and 10 minutes. Wait for this to fully go back into flush to the pot, and that has to be at 0 before we can take this pressure regulator off. Okay, the pressure is down to 0. That is level. I'm going to take my regulator off. I'm going to twist to open. One thing you must always be very careful of when you're opening your pressure canner, always lift it up and turn it away from you. Did you see all the steam coming out? You don't want that coming at you. Oh, and do you hear that? That's what every canner wants to hear. Jars are sealing. Oh, another one. There we have it. We're going to let them sit in there for another 5 minutes to cool off, and then I'll take them out. Okay, it's safe to take the jars out of the canner now. Looks fantastic. I'm happy to say that I'm not seeing any siphoning that took place. Nothing is cracked. And as you heard when we opened up the jar, or opened up the pot, the jars all started to seal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave them sit out here and cool. Typically let them sit for 24 hours on the counter. And then at that point, we are going to take off the rings. You never store pressure can or water bath can with the rings on, because what will happen is if it did not seal properly, it's called a false seal. So if I left this on and the jar didn't seal, then when I went to open this up to use it, the product's going to be bad and I wouldn't know that. So what tomorrow, after 24 hours, I'm going to take these rings off, then I'm going to try and pull the seals off. And that's my indicator that these sealed successfully. You can tell when you look at these, just by touching them, they have all sealed, but they're still sealing because of the heat. These are very, very hot, and I'm sure you can see some of them, like this one right here, is still bubbling. And that's because of the amount of pressure they were under in the pot. So we're going to let them sit for 24 hours. We're going to take the lids off. We're going to wipe them all down. We're going to mark the tops of them with what they are and the date, and then put them on the shelves. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, give us a thumbs up and think about subscribing, and leave any comments down below of things that you might be interested in canning. Be happy to go through a video for you. Thanks for watching. Have a good one. Bye, friend.